We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. Furthermore, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and public health experts do not recommend that people in the United States take precautionary.
It's a global, universal, equal opportunity killer. And we can't see it, we can't taste it, you can't even measure it in the rain because it's low levels. But as it rains out, every day it accumulates in the environment. And what they're doing is serving us a dose of radiation that will last for thousands of years, that has contaminated all of North America.
This is the moment Japan's nuclear disaster began. A giant tsunami wave crashes into the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, seriously damaging the building's reactors. On Sunday, radioactive water will be discharged into the sea. Meanwhile, workers are investigating a possible leak from reactor number 3. And while Japan seeks to prevent future disasters, international concern is growing over the handling of the current nuclear crisis.
Let's review the accident. The first hydrogen explosion occurred at the building housing reactor number 1. It happened after the meltdown, which took place about 10 hours after the earthquake. In this program, we'll look at reactors 2 and 3. The temperatures in these reactors were under control for a while after the tsunami. There was sufficient time to take action, and the staff should have known what they needed to do. So why couldn't they prevent the meltdowns and the release of huge amounts of radioactive substances? To find the answer, we met often with TEPCO workers who tackled the crisis at the site. We discovered that both the utility and government authorities continue to ignore a crucial problem related to nuclear safety.
Our investigation revealed an unexpected fact that made the aftermath of the accident worse. It turns out a safety mechanism might have had the tendency to become harder to operate as the crisis worsened. Furthermore, not just the tsunami, but also the earthquake may have had a critical impact, though TEPCO has denied it.
Given the scale of the earthquake, it's possible some devices were not sufficiently quake-proof. We cannot deny the possibility that they suffered damage and caused leaks. As you've seen, pipes that were not built to withstand severe quakes might have cracked, leading to the breakdown of key safety equipment. The Diet Investigation Commission has pointed out that the earthquake may have played a role. In addition to the malfunctioning SR valves we showed earlier, problems related to the most basic issues of nuclear safety remain unexamined. Next, we look at reactor number 3, which faced a crisis before reactor number 2. Operators failed to prevent a meltdown here, too, even though time was on their side. In the background was an issue that went beyond the grounds of the plant.
After the accident, reactor number 1, reactor number 3 experienced a core meltdown and hydrogen explosion. Operators had the time and the know-how to prevent the crisis, but failed to do so. Why? As it turned out, there was a hidden pitfall. This was reactor number 3's main control room 32 hours before the hydrogen explosion. Operators were continuing efforts to cool down the reactor with the few batteries that had survived the tsunami. A day and a half had already passed since the tsunami plowed through the plant. It was just a matter of time before they would run out of batteries. At the onset of the crisis, TEPCO had arranged for batteries to be delivered to the Fukushima Daiichi plant. The self-defense forces delivered 2-volt batteries, which are often used at power plants. But operators needed 12-volt batteries to open the SR valves. The batteries are highly portable and weigh as little as 10 kilograms. 10 of them provide enough power to open an SR valve. Why didn't the operators get the batteries they asked for? During the early hours of the crisis, TEPCO found it hard to keep up with requests for emergency supplies. A senior official in charge of procurement at the time says his team wasn't able to prioritize the request for 12-volt batteries.
The people responding to the crisis needed all kinds of things. We were trying to juggle all of the requests at the same time, trying to get them delivered as quickly as we could. We didn't have time to prioritize. We just tried to grab whatever was on the list regardless of quantity. I believe we're in a situation where screening each request according to priority was very difficult.
As a result, the distribution station received nothing but 2-volt batteries during the crisis. Most of them remained on the shelf. The chaotic approach to providing essential materials deepened the disaster. At Fukushima Daiichi, workers were still without the batteries they needed to prevent a meltdown. Rising radiation levels compounded the problem. This shows radiation levels near the main gate of the plant. On March 13th, the number rose to 281 microsieverts per hour. At that rate, the annual exposure limit would be reached in just 4 hours. Without the batteries they desperately needed. During the Fukushima crisis, 3 reactors melted down in succession. The radioactive materials they released have contaminated the soil. More than 160,000 residents are still unable to return home.
All radiation is damaging. It's cumulative. Each dose you get adds to your risk of getting cancer.
Right now we're seeing the Japanese government is in chaos. The fact that the revelation of this extensive contamination is coming now more than 2 years after the accident occurred indicates that it's completely out of control. And the command and control is in chaos in Japan right now. And really the big question is, why aren't they calling international aid to address the radioactive contamination of the Pacific Ocean?
Why do you suspect they aren't calling international aid?
The problems are, I think, clearly that there's no transparency, and the government and the industry, as documented by the Japanese Diet, their Congress, is that there's been a collusion all along. And so what we're seeing is a veil being drawn over the accident to promote an agenda for the restart of these reactors in Japan, and to try to contain the bad news rather than the radiation.
That's very concerning because the radiation is much worse than just the news itself. Now, what can be done beyond these dams that you mentioned before in terms of contaminating the leakage?
Well, in order to contain the leaks, we have to isolate the radioactive waste. But indications are right now that the reactor structures themselves have been breached. It's very likely that some of the radioactive material, the melted cores, have moved into the earth, and it's beyond containment right now. I think that's the tragedy that we see unfolding as Fukushima's radioactive water crisis is only beginning.
That's very concerning. How far has this radiation spread, and how fast is it going while it spreads?
Again, some of the radioactive isotopes are more mobile than others. The radioactive tritium, the hydrogen, it moves anywhere water goes because it is radioactive hydrogen and makes up a component of water. So the spread of the contamination is only going to be as effectively monitored as the technology is out there. And frankly, we don't know the full extent. Nobody really knows the full extent of the contamination at this point as it moves through not only groundwater but also through the atmosphere.
Approximately 300 tons of water was filtering through the site until early this month, becoming laced with radioactive materials and then seeping into the sea. Another factor is the ever-increasing amount of water accumulating inside damaged infrastructure. Once it makes its way into reactor buildings, it mixes with radioactive isotopes. For months, TEPCO workers have been pumping up 400 tons of water every day and storing it in tanks on site.
There's 1,060 tanks, stainless steel water tanks, that are holding the water which they keep pumping into the damaged reactors and the spent fuel storage pools.
From the air, the scale of the problems at Fukushima become clear. The growing mass of storage tanks now dwarfs the plant itself. More than 1 million tons of highly radioactive water is now stored here.
But the tanks have been hastily built.
They're made of steel plates, bolted together, rather than welded. Last week, workers detected a major leak in one of those tanks. About 300 tons of water escaped, releasing several quadrillion becquerels of radioactive particles.
Experts have often pointed out how vulnerable they are to damage.
The tanks, though, have been put together very quickly. There's no guarantee they'll last. Their seals are made of rubber, and the joints and bolts are corroding, and they may last not more than 5 years.
So the tank farm has grown dramatically, and it's on the hill. Of course, the problem is, because it's on the hill, the water flows down, and if there's an earthquake, all of these pipes are held together with plastic piping, not much different than what you've got on a swimming pool. So the plastic pipe will snap, and that water will just run right down that roadway directly into the ocean.
So the radiation has been leaking into the water and polluting the fish continuously for the last 2 years.
Plus strontium, plus cesium, plus tritium, and I could go on and on and on. If it gets into the sea, the algae concentrated hundreds of times, then the crustaceans concentrated hundreds of times, then the little fish, then the big fish, then us. Because we stand on the apex of the food chain. You can't taste these radioactive elements, you can't see them, and you can't smell them. They're silent.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German marine research institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
The fuel core of Unit 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. More than 1,500 fuel rods sit in a damaged storage pool 30 meters above ground.
Yeah, the amount of radioactivity in the rods themselves is about 14,000 times that of the Hiroshima bomb.